How you doing? Everybody good?
I'm good. Are you back stateside or are you still international?
Oh man, come on now. You know, I can't stand the Cayman. You can't stand the Caymans longer than just a couple of days. Otherwise, you go broke.
Woo. Oh, if that's why, okay, because you go broke. I'm like, who can't stand the Caymans more than a couple of days?
Wow.
Yeah, I gotcha. Wow, look it. Neil is here. Do my eyes deceive me?
Yes.
I don't know. He'll have to talk first. You might be a bot. Or are you real? Is that real or is that Memorex? Neil, you're not talking to us.
Unmute, bro.
Hey, how's it going?
There you go.
There you go.
Sorry, just got connected. I just
Yep.
We were teasing you. We thought maybe you were a bot because you weren't answering us.
Oh yeah, no. I connected, but then my headphone was not connected. So
Got it. So we are live on Facebook and YouTube. So since you're last in, Neil, you get to pray.
sounds good. Joe, thank you again for this time and opportunity to talk about these things. We pray that people will be encouraged and equipped, and that they will use this information this Christmas, in fact.
Amen.
Amen. Did you say you hope they'll use it this Christmas? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
You want the ER department to be full, huh?
Well, if you can't talk about religion during Christmas, what else can you talk about?
Yeah, right. Not the way we're posing it. Not the way we are posing it. Okay, Kevin, I'm gonna put you on. There you are.
There you go.
Okay. All right, everyone. So we are, if you've got any people, ping them in the room. We are going to move on in our conversation today about atheism and Darwinism. And the question is, are they the same thing? And our last two discussions, we really got into communism. But what I want to do is discuss now some of these points that are in the book that Kevin has made. And then we kind of cross into this idea of God damning Darwinism, right? And so let me just read a couple of bullet points or things for us to think about, and then we're going to hop right into defining atheism, because I don't know that we truly, understand the whole breadth of that and what that means. We generally, I think, at least for myself, sometimes I think it just means someone who doesn't believe in God, and that it's that simple, like there's nothing else. So a few questions. The facts supplied in the preceding pages about Marx and his fervent reliance on Darwinism should raise many questions. Those who are awakening and are not knee-jerk ideological, but rather are wise, prudent, and thoughtful, will begin to ask questions similar to the following. 1. How can businesses, corporations, and organizations who kowtow to woke mobs assert they are ethical while standing with those who encourage race superiority, Darwinist white supremacy, and scientific racism, eugenics, and Planned Parenthood, embodied in what we have as cultural Marxism? Should business ethics include rejecting hateful and destructive doctrines and movements? I know I'm just going to the next question, but that question right there is number one. Like, how do we even get businesses to have that conversation? Anyone got any thoughts? I mean, sure, we don't want businesses to do that, but yeah, it's a private industry, right? Can't they do and believe and enact what they want to do? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, we get them to have that conversation by putting them on blast, put them on Front Street. We have the other, other folks that will go in there and do shakedowns to the board of directors and everything else. We need to become more vocal. We need to become more pushy, for lack of a better term, to the extent that we go to these business owners. We say, look, you may not have known, so there's some ignorance that was involved here, but here's the facts, here's the deal, and there's a better way, and the way is to reject Marxism and all of the racism therein, and allow us to have some conversations with you, some real conversations about real change, real unity within your workforce. So, I think that as these facts about, Marx, Darwin, all these folks come out, the pressure can be put on. But I think this has been obscured and sort of glossed over for so long. It's going to take a little while for us to get there, but I think we will.
So how do I walk into am I going to my local Walmart? Am I going to the mom and pop store on the corner? So where do I even begin? Should I find an organization that's already doing this work? How do I begin if I'm concerned about organizations? Where do I begin? Lonnie and then Kevin. Because Lonnie, I see you're off.
Having spent time in the tech sector, and I know Kevin and Neil as well, there was a time when businesses, and specifically the tech industry, was just about innovation and competition. That was their chief concern, and ideologies and worldviews and so forth. It wasn't something that came to the forefront.
That's right.
And when did that all change? I remember during Steve Jobs' tenure at Apple, that's not something that ever came up. They just wanted to compete and win and dominate a market segment. But then with the advent of Cook after Jobs' passing, that's when I really began to notice that, from an Apple standpoint, they started to comment on things that we're discussing now and having a particular worldview that, it doesn't line up with what we believe. But business should have no place in commenting in these areas. And I just find it interesting that there was a shift that took place, and now all these companies tend to act and be woke, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it took place really on the lead up to the Obama administration and during Obama's reign, which continues to this day. So, I think that was the real catalyst really for putting us in this era of, ultra sensitivity towards race. But you don't have these conversations going to your local Walmart, all right? Because they don't make any decisions there. Corporate decisions are in corporate headquarters, and corporate decisions are made at the board level. And so this is really something that needs to be taken up at a higher level within these organizations. Now, I do think that employees could help sensitize their workplaces and provide, for instance, the training that we do at every Black Lives Matters, provide our training as an alternate training for the other types of trainings that are already going on in their workplaces. And so ultimately, the more influence we can have with the book and with the trainings and with et cetera, articles we're writing and videos we're putting out, those types of things, we're going to be able to have some impact on some of these things as they occur across the country. But for right now, we have to, just keep pressing and take advantage of whatever opportunity comes our way.
Neil? Oh, go ahead, Lonnie.
I was just thinking during my association with American Family Radio that when Target decided it wanted to allow cross-dressing, I don't know if that's a proper term, but males into women's restrooms because they profess to be female, though they're in fact male, that we mounted an effort from a marketing standpoint to say that, do you still shop at Target knowing that your daughter or your wife can be put at risk by these individuals coming into the into the restrooms and the dressing rooms? And it had impact, and we had some impact on their bottom line for season. But what was really interesting is the Target continued on with this. They had the audacity to say that we don't care what the public is stating in this event that we launched several years ago. And so those are the kind of things that we have to do, and we must continually do these types of things. And if corporate America is woke, and someone was telling me, they said, well, Lonnie, they're all woke, so what can we do? Pick a company, pick some organization that you can voice your opinion to and mount even something in social media, which is what we did, and then we carried it over to radio programming as well, that can have impact, at least to wake these individuals up, at least for them to think twice before they decide to go down this road.
There you go. Yep. That's right.
Not that I want to create more work for myself, but, I think our organization we had talked about doing chapters, right? We had talked about having not a brand ambassador, but we had talked about having, memberships or points in different parts of the country, because really it has to be spearheaded. I don't know that, and there are people who are in their state or their community to be like, yeah, I would do it, but there's support that's needed, right? There's training, there's talking points, there's material. There are, how would you galvanize them if there's not a already established group, Facebook group, chat? How would you email thread? So as an individual, how do we galvanize them? And I, over the course of our time together, I've seen emails come in and people are like, do you have a chapter in my state? Do you have this? And I think this conversation brings up a point for us to consider on, we have the textbook already been woke up, right? So that there is a way to organize, at least give them the talking points, the training, the understanding. But it is definitely not something that would be successful launched alone. I think people are going to want to connect with other people. If there's a certain corporation that has a headquarters in their state or their city, right? And, they wanted to go to a business meeting, or they wanted to set some appointments, there are people around them that they would need to galvanize, that they would want to, and that they would want the talking points, and they'd want the support and a little bit of the hand holding to do that.
Yeah.
And it may be time for us to consider that. I realize what I'm saying. I can see your face, Kevin. I realize who's going to be organizing that stuff to a degree. Right? But if we're going to help the community have a voice, even in just the idea of talking to corporations, I'm just talking myself into more work. Let me be quiet now. Go back to reading. Neil, you want to say anything?
I know. I think Kevin articulated that quite right. I mean, that's how we have to do. We have to go inside. Okay. I will comment on this. I think, as a whole, Christians and conservatives are very wimpy about this. They just don't. They don't take action like the left does. And so, even though we're a larger majority of the people, and we have abdicated our responsibility by just not getting involved. Like when the Target boycott was called, it lasted for a while, but then people just went back to shopping there again. So, I mean, it definitely had an effect. But I mean, Target should have lost 50% of their business because most of the people who shop there are parents and families who tend to be conservative. But they didn't lose 50% of their business. I think they lost like 15 to 20% of their business. So, I think if we were more diligent about what it is that we're doing and more single-minded, I think we'd be able to accomplish a whole lot more.
Neil, and that already puts me in the mindset that after this book, we need to go into Jesus was involved in politics.
That's good to me.
That needs to be our next series that we discuss, because in general, I think Christians feel that they don't need to be involved, or they should just pray.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And that they should just pray. And there's also the idea that, the world's coming to the end anyway, so they got their suitcase packed, they're ready for the rapture.
It's frustration because people are like, well, the end is coming. I'm like, do you wish that the Republican Party had said the end is coming, we don't need to free the slaves?
Right.
We still have slaves today, right? We still have racism. How dare you think the end is coming and so we don't need to do anything?
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's more than, and even along with that, I think we are, depending on your culture, you're not as focused as some other cultures on generations, right? What you pass on to the next generation. Many of us are just trying to live our life now.
Yeah.
Right. And now is all that matters.
Right.
And honestly, I tell you, when you read the scriptures, the apostles thought Yeshua was coming back like next month.
Right. Right.
When you read it, they thought he'd be back. Well, first of all, they didn't think he'd really die. Right. And so then when he's like, yeah, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Hello, I'm going to die. And then he dies. But he says he's coming back. And so then he comes back. And then when he goes up in the cloud, he's like, I'm sending you a comforter. And they're like, okay, cool. So Holy Spirit comes and they're like, great, they got that. And, so a few years, they're expecting him to return. That's almost 2,000 years ago.
Yep.
Ask anybody, 40 years ago, and they're like, oh, he's coming back. Remember when 1999, we're switching over to 2000, and that whole, that whole thing about the 2000, and that was the time, and so here we are 22 years later, and I think the thought is any moment now, right? Any moment now.
Yeah, it's every generation has thought Christ was returning, right? In 1988, I remember there was 88 reasons why Christ will return in 88, or I think it was in 87 he released it, right? And then Harold Camping came along and he did his stuff. And if you go back earlier, the Jehovah's Witnesses, their whole thing is that Christ was going to come back in 1914 and then 1944 and or something like that. There were all these things. And if you go back even before that, right after the Great Awakening and Second Great Awakening. Oh, well, the Second Great Awakening. Okay, because Christ is coming back, right? So in the 1800s, 1700s, So people have, absolutely, as you said, people have always thought he's coming back. The question is, if he doesn't come back, is he going to find you here sitting around saying, oh, he's coming back and not doing anything? I think God's going to turn to the to the Christians, and he's going to say, what did you do with the country I gave you, the nation I gave you? I gave you a nation that is the most giving nation in the world. America gives 9 times more than everybody else, and the next closest ones, right? America is the most sending nation. We have sent more evangelists, more missionaries. We're the most healing nation. We've created more hospitals around the world than anywhere in the world. We have the highest technology nation than anywhere in the world. We used to have the highest freedoms in all the world. And you're just sitting around doing nothing. God's going to come back and says, I gave you this greatest sending nation, and now instead of sending people out, people have to send people to America to save you. You're the greatest economic nation, and now you're in economic dire. You used to have the greatest number of Christian population, and now that's diminishing. And then they'll say, what?
Yeah. Yeah, Neil. Kevin, you are off.
It's
Hold on, I can hide you, but you can't be off cam. I'm sorry.
Kevin and I have discussed this at length, and them having the mindset. And I always look at clergy as the field generals in God's mighty army, and the field generals need to lead and set an example. So as the leadership goes, so does the congregation or the rest of the military ranks. And but they have their backs packed. I used to say on the show, just sitting there with their bags packed at the train station, waiting for that train to come, that Jesus train, to take them out of here. And the train comes, and so that's not the train. And then another train comes by, and that's not the train. Well, he's coming. And meanwhile, as the old saying goes, Rome burns, right? And the other thing is, to have that mindset. I said, well, what if you're wrong? And you have that mindset, and your grandchildren and your great-great-grandchildren suffer because of what you didn't do in this time, in your lifetime, when we have this great nation that we could lean upon because it sets so many standards throughout the globe, and you let it fall asunder because of the anti-God evil agenda. Yep.
And so I wonder how many. I hope we get a chance to get to atheism today, because if we don't, that's fine. But I would dare say how many of us, by our mere actions, live like we're atheists. In the things that we don't do, in the things that we read, and how we don't move, and understanding, occupying. We are the local people of wherever you are. We're not trying to necessarily tell you to pack up your bags and move to a third world country to preach Jesus. Why not fix your yard where you are first? Occupy where you are. Be the light, where you are. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't buck up against any ideas of colonization and, pushing things. And your culture is where you are at this particular moment. If you are in Canada or New Mexico or Massachusetts, if you're in, London, if you are in Vietnam, wherever you are, occupy that space in a way that would be representative of how we saw Jesus, Yeshua, walk through the earth. We walk through his community. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, so absolutely. In fact, you just reminded me of it. The whole concept of occupy. Jesus said, "Occupy until I return," and he also, if you go back to the exile, the Jews were in exile 70 years, right? And in those 70 years, they were told by the prophets, settle down, make a home of it, do your business, get involved with the local community, be part of it. Don't separate yourself from that community. Engage, right? And they knew it was only 70 years, right? If they'd been reading and listening to the prophets, they would have known that they're in exile for 70 years, and then they're going to return to their land. And we see them doing exactly that, getting involved, being part of the businesses, being part of the economy, being part of all that. And now here we are in 2022, and the Christians are saying, "Oh, Jesus is coming back any day." Well, come on, we've been saying that for 2,000 years, and he hasn't come back. Do you think that you need to start occupying like he told us to? So anyway, my frustration.
Yeah, Neil, you're going to have to find that in your book or find some of those scriptures, because when you say that, I'm like, no, they didn't. The prophets did not tell them to. I'm saying in my head, no, the prophets told them to not pick up the culture, to not marry the wives from the other cultures, to not follow the false gods. So I'm gonna need some scripture. I'm not.
Yeah. No, so they. I mean, you're absolutely right. They weren't supposed to follow the false god, which is like we're not supposed to be following false gods. They're not supposed to pick up the evil parts of their culture, like we're not supposed to pick up but they were supposed to embrace the culture in the sense of anything that was moral. But they were supposed to get involved in business. They were supposed to set up shop. They're supposed to trade. They're supposed to get involved politically. And if you can look at the examples that we have Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. We have Daniel, Belshazzar. We have all these guys getting involved. So part of it, Esther and Mordecai, we have got this whole system. I mean, Mordecai was making the laws, right? And was protecting the king. The king who was conquered them, he was actually protecting him, right? He discovered a plot to kill the king. And so we see that they were well involved in there, but they were told not to worship their gods, which they didn't, not to worship their king, as we know. So absolutely, yeah, those are easy passages to find, yes.
Okay, that's good, because thank you for saying those things, because it's right there, blatant, right? If you just look at the book of Esther, about getting involved in the things that were happening in the community. So yeah, I think we have to reevaluate that, and if not this group, going to reevaluate. Here you go, Kevin. I'll put you back there. So, who are the ones that are going to, lead the example? We've got these great books, right? Woke Up, and Jesus was involved in politics. I think I'm just talking to myself here. Okay, sorry about that. So we were asking the question about what do we say to businesses? And I think there is some follow-up that needs to happen on our end as an organization to begin to put the tools in other people's hands, or at least help to support. And I can roll with that, right? Because if you look at the structure, which we talked about last week, right, Neil, about a republic, really, and what Moses did, what God told Moses to do in setting up the structure was a real republic, right? 10 people, and you have a leader, and then there's a leader over those 10 groups of people. Mm-hmm. But there is one, main person in charge at the top of the pyramid, but everything was a theocratic. Everything was God's law. Right. Everything was governed by that. And so if we want to lead that example, and if we want to put forth that example to the community, I think that we can.
Right. And here's another point. If you notice, the commandment from God was 1 in 10 people should be politically involved. Right? So 1 in 10, there should be every family, the 10th family or the 10th person should be politically. So 1 in 10 should be politically involved. And, we barely see that. So,
because we don't think of politics in the Torah. We're like, I think we think now that politics is strictly man-made establishment of what we see now with Congress and Capitol and White House. We don't really understand, or we don't understand how politics looked like during the time in the Old Testament, and it was always there. It is not anything new, but we have manipulated it, changed it, given it new definitions and defines, when really it is something that has always been seen. I mean, why were there wars? Why did you need kings? Why did you need judges? Why did the prophets have to go and speak to people? Why, were there city boundaries? Why we see in the laws where there, the priests, the Levites, right, were set about to establish, to teach, and to perform, and to heal, and be the doctors, and be the army. I mean, all of that is politics.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, if you think about it, you can't get away from politics. Well, as some of the philosophers said, you might ignore politics, but politics won't ignore you. So, but I think it's a brainwashing of the left. The left has specific, and this is a very common communist plot. It's a little known fact that back in when Lenin took over Russia, that whole thing, he took over Russia without firing a single shot, right? Because there was a lot of upheaval. There were lots of different groups that were wanting the zone. Left the castle, the palace, and Lenin's men kind of marched into the palace and noticed that there was nobody there. And there were multiple other competing groups, much better groups. There was a group of Republican type, there was a Republican movement that wanted representation by the people, and they were there, and then the communists were there, and there was a bit different factions of socialists were there, the unionists were there. So Lenin walks in with his people, they take over the palace, and they say, okay, we're in control now. And all the Russians were like, wait, no, who are these guys? We don't even know who these guys are. This is some schmuck from Europe who's been funded by, the Rothschild. I mean, they didn't know that at the time, but why does he get to decide what it? And then they spread the word that says, no, the army is going to come back. Just go with the plan. It's all according to plan. We will come back and take over. Don't worry about it. It's all planned. But that was Lenin spreading that rumor that, it's all going according to plan. Just stay calm until we need you. We'll call you when we need you. And so all these other groups were silenced by this propaganda that the communists were spreading. Makes you think of Q, right? QAnon. It's all going according to plan. Don't worry about it. It's all the secret plan that nobody knows, but everybody knows. And that's exactly what the communists were spreading back there. And they're still doing that today. Oh no, it's all, it's all according to plan. Just wait for Jesus to come back, or you shouldn't be involved in politics. It's all going according to plan. It's all, and so I think a lot of the people who are spreading these words are either part of the plan or are just deceived by the plan. And the answer is no. Nobody's going to come to your rescue until you step up and do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I'm getting a lot of real understanding and clarity as to, just some things that I'd never thought about. And so having these discussions, I hope that's working for other people as well. I'm going to invite some of our guests up if they want to comment. But I think that we don't really look at the beginning of our Bible and understand that everything that we see in the New Testament came from, they were only following the Old Testament because there was no New Testament when they were walking the earth, right?
Yeah. Right.
And we have lost, and it's more than, I think it's more than just the left. I think it's evil.
Yeah.
Right? It is evil. It's evil because we wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? But against principalities and powers and wickedness in high places. And so those evils have been around forever. The left has not been around, for 6,000 generations. I mean, millennia. But evil has, right? So evil has always been there. And it has always been the thing that has brought division and separated us from what should be the Garden of Eden that we are living in and we're walking in, what should be the government and structure of politics that our Creator set up. And I don't think we look at the way that Moses was able to be a leader over 3 million people, without telephones, without newspaper. There were no railroads. There was just so many things that were not existent, but they were able to set up something that would govern them, and that they were a wealthy people, and that they're who they were when they were in right alignment with him. Other nations feared them, right? But when they got out of sync, then they got taken over. And can we bring that same example to us now? We, as people of faith, have gotten out of sync for a long time, but it was such a slow drift. It was a slow drift. Yes, Neil, go ahead.
Oh, no. I wasn't saying anything. I think it's just a bump.
Oh, okay. So, corporations. We should question them on their business ethics, including, rejecting hateful and destructive doctrines and movements. And I'm pretty sure we're going to get in here, and we've talked about this before on this platform, that it's not just corporations. You need to be at your Board of Education meetings. You need to be at your town zoning. You need to be at city councils. You need to be at those things in your communities. So the next question, or the next thought, I'm going to move on, is point 2. Now that historical precedents have been uncovered, connecting Marxism to Darwin's racism, white supremacy, genocide, the active and intentional undermining of existing social order, including the nuclear family, business, and economies, and faith religion, how should we respond to Marxism as it influences our schools' curriculums, K through college? How should we respond to school boards as they thoroughly embrace all Darwinian theories and significantly pivot toward the diabolical reprobation of Marxism and critical race theories? So that's point 2 on a thought on what we need to do. I'm not sure if we can inject atheism in here yet, but that's that's just point 2, or a second thought that we should think about. The third thought is, since Marx used Darwin's terms, referring to blacks as gorillas and worse, when will we demand a public renouncement and denouncement of Marx? Knowing how Marx and Engels felt about blacks and other ethnic minorities, aren't those who continue to support Marxism, cultural Marxism, and associated accoutrements by definition racist, white supremacist, and eugenics? And I think until we begin to teach people, most are going to look around their world and say, well, I don't see Marx or Darwin anywhere, right? No one's wearing a t-shirt that says, I love Darwin, or, well, they might be with Karl Marx, but for the most part, they're not wearing something big and bold, like the devil's not standing there in a red suit with a pitchfork and horns and a tail. So recognizing that evil works through these philosophies, trains of thoughts, and movements means that it has to be fully and completely rejected, because there's no way for it to get saved. Right. Like Marxism, Darwinism, they can't get saved, they can't be baptized, and now they've turned their life around. Right there, it is evil. Right. And it does have a place and judgment at the end of the world. But until then, it is going to do all that it can to disrupt and keep most of us distracted. Yes, Neil, you're off mic.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, we don't see them walking around with it, but they're being taught, our kids are being taught this in high schools and grade school and colleges, right? So, yeah, there's nobody going around saying, oh, Marx was great. Although there was a while where people were wearing Che Guevara t-shirts. Right. And I think what Kevin has done is a great thing, because now I can go up to somebody and say, well, did you know that Che Guevara was a racist? You know, did you know that Marx was a racist? You know, and people look at you with what? Who? You know, but I think while they're not out there and open, they are definitely out there around us and surrounding us. And that's the kind of thing that we have to target and eliminate. Otherwise, we'll go down with the ship.
But they've hidden it in the books.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have to know what's being taught, and it's in a book, although there are some schools that don't have books, but we won't go there right now. But it's being put in writing, as you said, that's being taught to our children. And again, that's the idea of, are we really concerned about building generational wealth, right? And is generational wealth to us only financial capital? There are other things that create and allow generational wealth to survive, that a mindset that helps you create generational wealth, right? That helps you see that in your family, divorce is down, you know, that you see marriages for 30 and 40 years. You see happy, well-adjusted children. You see, and you can see that in homes without marriage. I'm not saying that that's the only way. But what I am pointing out, or what I want us to look at, is that, are you thinking about leaving generational wealth? And I'm not just talking about finances, right? Are you leaving a legacy? Are you training your children in the way that they should go? So when they are old, they will not depart. And I think we've been deceived on what that looks like, right? If they're not a pastor, an evangelist, a prophet, you know, if they're not in the church 3 and 4 times a week, is that our define of, you know, training our children up? Is that our define of them not departing? Because we got some snakes that are pastors, right? And the thing with it is that many of them are leading their congregation astray by siding with or allowing in their pulpits, or making association with those individuals who are clearly supporting this socialist Marxist agenda. And because it's not called that, because he dresses, you know, nice, and his wife is the first lady sitting on the row fanning herself, and, you know, the choir's there, that somehow Marxism, Darwinism, atheism, socialism is not sitting in my church, and it's not teaching me, and I'm not, you know, we've got to look at it different, that when we send our children to school, that we are in some aspects putting them to nurse on the breast of, you know, this evil that they are drinking in, that's affecting that the way that they grow. Go ahead, Kevin, you're off mic.
Yeah, so it's so one of the things that about Marxism is that it is transparent and it is veiled, because pretty much it's everywhere. Okay, but it is not subtle. So all we have to do is get woke up, and we could see, wait a minute, when they start talking about DEI and everybody has to be in shared equity within our company, that's Marxism. Yeah, exactly. It is. When they start talking about we need to level the playing field for social justice and increase the tax on the rich, that's Marxism. Yes, it is. When they start talking about we need to get rid of free speech now because Twitter is now the free speech platform and it's dangerous, that's communism. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So it's not subtle. but it is veiled and transparent because it is literally everywhere. What we need to do, the job that we need to do, is open eyes, or make people aware of what it is, so they can then begin to do something and make some interventions wherever they see it. So they could say to their boss, you know what, this is Marxist, I think, what you're doing. And Marx was an avowed racist. How could you? I'm just confused. You talk about anti-racism here, and you're putting up this policy, and yet you're following the schemes of a racist. So I'm help me to understand this. But we need to be able to have these conversations and confront people with, things that potentially they're very ignorant about, and help them to understand what it really, really is.
It kind of reminds me of how we need to wear our masks. You need to walk around, and you need to protect yourself. You need to guard what you're breathing in.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to make an analogy to COVID, because we all have different thoughts about that. But my point is that if you're breathing something in that you can't see and you can't taste, you may not think it's fatal.
Right.
Right. You may think that you're okay, and that everybody's okay, until after a while people start dropping down on the ground because of carbon monoxide poisoning or something like that. That's what I'm alluding to, that, like you're saying, once you know what it is, we know that carbon monoxide is not good for us, but you can't really see it.
Right.
And you can't smell it.
Right.
Right. And so you could be sitting there dying or having your oxygen decreased because you're not aware of what's being seeped in. And so that's why we have CO detectors to help us, because in our own senses, we cannot detect that, but it will kill you just because you can't see it. Go ahead, Lonnie.
Yeah, so it's Kevin made me think of Mark David Robinson in North Carolina, who was just a regular guy, blue-collar guy. I believe he worked for FedEx or something like that, and had enough of what he was seeing within his community that he went to a city council meeting and spoke up, and he just shared what was on his heart based on, calling out the foolishness, and it so resonated within the city council and throughout the community that it started a movement of which they thrust him to the front of, and behold, he was elected lieutenant governor of that state because of it. And those are the types of things that need to take place. If people get fed up enough that they have to say something at your school board meeting, and say something at your city council meeting, or wherever you have access to speak up and say something. And it doesn't have to be particularly eloquent. He's just a very direct kind of guy, and he spoke his heart and his mind, and it stirred up, those in the community that had the same type of values, which I think is the preponderance of Americans today, and they rallied behind it, and he was elected to office. That's a great example of what can take place if you do speak up. Like Kevin says, this stuff is everywhere, and it permeates, and it's everywhere because we don't speak up enough. We don't say enough of what's going on. And we do need to be educated, and thank God for Kevin's book and Neil's book, because they are great primers for educating you on the basics of what takes place. And you can I can see, and here I'm envisioning stuff, guys, is we just have a plethora of folks across the country that walk in with those books underneath their arms and walk into city council meetings and start quoting passages from the book, which should rivet those sitting in seats of authority within city council or school board or wherever it happens to be across this nation.
Yeah, exactly.
Amen. That's good, because we as people of faith sometimes are fighting to have positions within a four-walled church. We are fighting to have our voice heard, to be recognized, to God gave me, I saw this, and take that outside. Take that outside and put that to practical use.
Yeah.
That can change the community. That can, but see, that's not a safe place. We don't understand it. right? Some of us have grown up in church, and so we understand the church flow, all the armor bearer stuff and the acknowledging and, praise. And we understand that because we've seen it. We've grown up eating that. But politics seems so foreign to us, right? And it should not be. It should be, the other way around, that we see the community as the place where we are working and doing. And that's because evil, again, religion has so brought us indoors into our small groups, siloed us, made the pastor the, I want to be like, and all the other, leaders, that's what we want to aspire to, when there is real world application for fivefold ministry. Now, I know there was all these things about the 10 mountains, about taking your gift and ministry into business and into workplace and on the different mountains. And I'm not for or against that. But I think there's something to be said about walking in what you need to be doing outside of the four walls of the church, because they didn't have four walls of church in Torah. They didn't have that then. Everybody lived and worked in their community and engaged in their community. And somehow, we know who did it or what did it, and if we trace the history back, we could see how somehow we shifted from being small groups, community focused, to now going to one location once or twice a week. And that's where we encountered and activated our faith. And then we went home and we just lived. And it should be the other way around. So let me get to this last point here. Or 2 points. So let's see. I did 1, 2, 3. Yes, I'm on the 4th point or thought to think about. Marx was a confirmed racist, white supremacist, womanizer, enslaver, pathetic and ungroomed moocher, virulently God-hating, non-working grifter. Why is he respected at all? Why would anyone associate or align with Karl Marx? Hasn't Marx earned the right to be loathed and rejected by all? Yeah. And our last point to consider, after considering their history and backgrounds, then reflecting on the respective influence they had on the worst despots in the history of mankind, can you name any redeeming factor in support of Darwin or Karl Marx? And so that kind of gives us that summarizing of how we are clearly having the understanding of Darwinism. So what is atheism? Right? Because I think if I were to talk to a Christian, I would say, what's worse, atheism or Darwinism? They might say atheism. But it's almost that it's the same thing. So go ahead, Neil.
Well, there's a couple of schools of thought here. I mean, one of them is that, and this is called, if you've ever heard of biologos, started by Francis Collins, a man I find as despicable as ever after the COVID thing. He was in charge of the CDC or whatever, the National Institutes of Health or whatever. And he and Fauci, and he's supposed to be a Christian. So Francis Collins came up with biologos. And biologos' whole thing is that God used evolution to create mankind, to create humans. And a lot of Christians have bought into this, and I think it's pure nonsense because a couple of reasons. If you say that God used evolution to create humans, I mean, I don't care if you say God used evolution to create mice or dogs or whatever, that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong there because the Bible says, he created them on the fourth day. But man, he hand formed him out of clay, right? And he breathed life into him. So when Biologos comes out and he says, "Oh yeah, God created mankind using evolution," you have a serious problem here, because then there was no first man. Adam and Eve weren't real people. There was no first sin, because if Adam and Eve were just evolved out of a bunch of other creatures, then there was no Garden of Eden. There was no fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There was no first sin. There's no man's sin nature, and everything falls apart from that point on, right? So, so I would say yes, it's very hard to be a Darwinian evolutionist and also a Christian. But there are people. Just to be clear, there are people who claim that, But I also want to add that Darwinianism is a failing theory. It's a theory in crisis. It has so many problems. And one of the biggest problems is it can't explain life. Where did life come from? It can't explain the Cambrian explosion. Back during the Cambrian era, rather than seeing a few species evolve, we see millions of species suddenly pop out in the fossil evidence. And they're like, well, there wasn't enough time for these things to evolve. So where did they come from? And so they're trying to explain the Cambrian explosion, and they're having a lot of trouble explaining it. And so Darwinian, the Darwinian theory as it is really collapsing upon itself, even though people they're trying to define what a species is. Before it was very clear what a species is. Now they're like, well, we don't know what a species really is, so we can't generally define evolution. And so, and the other thing that Darwin was quite convinced that as time went on, we would find the missing links, or links, not just one, but millions of them. We would find all the missing links between species. And yet, since Darwin, we have dug more, we have excavated more than he could have ever imagined. I mean, he never thought the population of the world would be 8 billion and people would be digging for construction and mining and minerals and oil and all that. And yet, rather than finding all the fossils kind of converging into some major species, we find them diverging. So now, if anything, there are more problems with Darwinism than there was when Darwin proposed his theory. So it's, so in question of, is there a difference between atheists and Darwin? Atheists are dependent on Darwinism to exist. You can have a Darwinian who's not an atheist, but you can't have an atheist who's not Darwinian.
Okay, I'm going to have you explain that in just a second. So I just want to read this definition. Atheism is one thing, a lack of belief in gods. Atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God, nor does it answer any other question about what a person believes. It is simply a rejection of the assertion that there are gods. Atheism is too often defined incorrectly as a belief system. To be clear, atheism is not a disbelief in gods or a denial of gods. It is a lack of belief in gods. So the reason I'm pushing at this is because I'm trying to find a devil to compare it to.
Right.
So people of faith, if I say, oh, he's an atheist, like, oh, we clutch our pearls and we back away, we put our fingers up in the form of a cross, so that would be to them. But what I want you to do is kind of show to us that atheism and Darwinism is probably the worst of the two. And like you said, did you say that we could have Darwinism without being an atheist?
Yeah. There are Christians who are Darwinists, right?
Okay.
So no, I think the theology is messed up, as I mentioned, right?
Right. So
Go ahead.
So what I would say is, sorry to just break in here, is you now I think about it, you're right. There are some so-called quote unquote Christians that are Darwinists or believe in evolutionary theory. I was going to say you can be an atheist without being a Darwinist, but you can't be a Darwinist without being an atheist. But I guess there are some of those examples that you brought up, Neil, and I think they're valid. But there is a distinction. Okay, so there are some atheists right now today that I know that are not Darwinists. They don't buy into evolution, and that races were all evolved in our own, genetic stream, and that blacks are somehow less than whites. They really, really believe that we were, created equal. Now, I don't know how they believe that, but they do. And so, and as a matter of fact, there's some Democrat pro-lifers who I've met that believe that way. They say, look, we're all created equal. That's a human life. That's a baby in that womb. And even though I'm a Democrat and an atheist, I am pro-life 100%.
Yeah, Christopher Hitchens was pro-life.
Yeah.
One of the most famous atheists.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. But I don't think you will find a Darwinist who is not an atheist.
Yeah, see, so I think that is the distinction. I think there is.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
So, but what's interesting is with the atheists that you referred to, and atheists in general have some really fundamental problems with their belief systems, because their belief systems have to all be preferences. You can't have a belief system. But I want to go back, before I come back to that belief system, I want to talk about, Regina, when atheists say, I don't have a belief in God, I am not making any assertion. They are, in fact, making the assertion that they don't think there is a God. And here's the problem with atheism, and is they realize that nobody can be an atheist. You cannot have, an atheist cannot exist. And you go, wait, what do you mean? Well, a logical, rational atheist cannot exist, because you can never say there is no God. The only way you can say there is no God is if you have searched everywhere and you've looked throughout the universe and decided that you haven't found God. But unless you can search everywhere, and the only way you can search everywhere is if you're omnipotent. And the only way you can go everywhere is if you're omnipotent. You have the power to go everywhere. And the only way, you see where this is going? So the only way you can say there is no God is if you knew everything and you were God yourself. So only God could say there is no God. An atheist can never say there is no God. He can only say, I don't think there is a God, which really makes him what we call an agnostic, which is, I don't know that there is a God, I just don't think there is one. And so atheists, after this philosophical argument came out, a lot of atheists go, oh, I don't want to sound stupid at the top of my voice. So I'm going to redefine what atheism is. But atheism means atheism, meaning no God. There is against God, there is no God. It's the contrary to God. So that's what atheism is. So either they should find a new name for themselves, which is agnostic. And many thinking atheists have agreed that they are really agnostics, meaning they don't know. And so that's the first part. But the second part I want to go back real quick is that atheists have a fundamental concept with a whole number of things. For instance, the people who say that all men are created equal, well, who created them? Then they can say, well, okay, nobody created them. They came from somewhere. Well, where do they come from? There is no God. They have to evolve. That's your only other option. So if they did evolve, then are one race more evolved than another race? Well, no, I think they're all equal. On what basis do you think they're all equal? You don't have any basis. You don't have a scientific basis. You don't have a rational basis, but you have a preference. You can say, I prefer that all men are created equal, but then you still have a problem. So what if all men are created equal? If there is no objective morality, if there is no objective right or wrong, then who cares if all men are created equal? You can kill anyone you want to. You can treat somebody else differently. So all an atheist who does not believe in objective moral law can say is that I have a preference that all men are created equal. And so in a sense, I think, and this is my personal views, atheism is the more bankrupt principle of all, because you have so many fundamental problems that you have to deal with. Everything falls apart in atheism, and they have to create their own little preferences.
Thank you for that. And what I'm pushing at is that people of faith can understand, I think, atheism and agnostic
more than they can Darwinism and Marxism, because we centralize our faith, we centralize God. And if you are against that, then, that's really bad. Like no Christian, no person of faith, well, maybe some, would go around and teach their children to be an atheist or an agnostic. Yet, we embrace socialism and Darwinism, right? And so I'm pushing at, by doing this comparison, I'm trying to shock the people of faith to like, look, have you just heard everything we've talked about Darwinism, socialism, Marxist? You can't embrace that. You absolutely cannot embrace. You'll gawk at an atheist. You'll gawk at agnostic. You will not teach your children to be that. But everything about Darwinism and Marxism and socialism does the same thing with our Creator. It puts man over God, gives them control, and pushes back on everything that we think we believe. I don't know if you understand that. So I'll go to Neil and then Lonnie.
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't commenting.
Okay, go ahead, Lonnie.
I was just going to comment. Remember talking to my dad many years ago when I was a youngster, and I asked him about atheist, and he responded to me. He said, son, I don't believe there's any such thing as an atheist. I said, really? Why is that? He said, well, I was in the military, right? I said, yeah. He says, I was in the Korean War. I said, yeah, I remember that. He says, well, I remember laying in those foxholes and bombs are falling all around us and bullets are going over our head. And I saw grown men who said they were atheists crying in those foxholes, calling out to Jesus, God, their mama, or all three at the same time. So he says, show me an atheist. I'll just show you someone that has not been put in a situation where they need to reach out and call out for someone. So I never forgot that when I was a kid.
That's good, Lonnie. I like that. So we're going to wrap up for today. I hope that if you're listening later on through the replays or on our podcast, that got you thinking, and also put us in a place that might hold us accountable as an organization for some things that we may need to do or put forth to assist. And of course, I'm not the boss, and so we will have a staff meetings tomorrow, actually, and we'll be traveling together all this weekend. Oh yeah, so let me say there will not be a live Clubhouse next Tuesday, as we will all still be traveling back from the conference.
Regina, I just wanted to add one more thing.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is important regarding to the book. What Kevin really articulates is that until Darwinism, though, the racism did not kick in. And the other thing that Darwinianism gave atheists, and this is what a lot of atheists say, is they had before Darwinism, there was no intellectual basis for atheism.
Right.
In other words, you could be an atheist, but then you looked around the world and you said, how do I explain how all this came to be? And so it was very tough to be an atheist. But when Darwin came along, and in the same way as it gave people the permission to be racist, it also gave them permission to be atheists. Yeah. So in a sense, Darwinianism, while today, understanding all this, when it started, Darwinianism actually was the cause of a lot of atheism. And even today, we see a lot of atheists are atheists because evolution managed to explain to them let me rephrase, managed to give them a lie about what was existing around the world.
Yep.
Got it. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, and to continue to have this conversation.
So Lonnie, Kevin, do you have any last statements before we close the room?
One last statement from me, and I'll try to make it quick. But Neil just brought up some wonderful, brilliant points as usual. Here's something that we should all consider. When Darwin, before reading Darwin and understanding some of his letters and some of his early observations, etc., Karl Marx was actually in a Protestant faith. He was an Anglican, I believe, and came from a Christian household. Stalin, Lenin, Hitler, all were brought up in the faith and were from Christian households. But after reading Darwin, it was over. It was like completely atheist, completely, demented, despotic towards everyone and practically everyone in humanity. So Darwin's work is very seductive and compelling, and the danger is when you think about it, it's infused throughout all of our academics from K through 16. This is problematic because it's if it's infused in there, it has a demonic substructure that really is seductive for people. 90+% of all scientists are atheists because they're fully immersed in Darwin's evolutionary theory. The other thing is modern day Hugh Hefner was a Christian, born, was a Christian young man, read Darwin's work, changed his life, and of course he started Playboy, and his life ended up how it ended up a few years ago. So that's modern day. And again, these people noted and talked about how Darwin changed their life. So this is not something that we should poo-poo and say, well, Darwinism, it's not really a big deal. It's a huge deal. It's profoundly impacting people to this very day. So that's the subtlety and the danger and the demonism within that theory. And that's my last word. And we'll be off next week, but looking forward to the week following.
Okay. Lonnie, anything?
2 words, just basically ditto and amen to Kevin's point that he rose.
Okay. And Neil, I guess you have nothing? You said your closing points already?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We will be back in 2 weeks. Right, so that'll be just after, because next Tuesday is the 20th, and the following Tuesday will be like the 27th or 28th. Wonderful. So for those of you that celebrate, be safe. Make sure that you are always giving your Creator all the glory for everything that you have, and use that as a time. Not that we shouldn't be thankful every day, but there's opportunity to really express that. So you can find our rooms. I have been updating our podcasts, so you will be able to also find our edited versions of these conversations on Apple iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. You'll be able to, and iHeartRadio, you'll be able to find us. So everyone, thank you so much. And this room will be closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Merry Christmas.